Welcome to the Internet History Podcast. I'm your host, Brian McCullough. As I've mentioned many times before on this podcast, there was an entire industry of independent internet service providers that popped up in the 1990s to help get Americans online. Sure, the online services like AOL and Prodigy eventually became de facto ISPs, but the truth is, a large percentage, possibly the majority of Americans, would eventually get online for the very first time thanks to local, often mom-and-pop ISPs that sprung up around North America and allowed users to dial in, surf the web, send email, etc. So, of course, I've wanted to delve deeper into this phenomenon for a while, and thus I was absolutely thrilled when Michael March contacted me and said that he was a fan of the show and wanted to share the story of Internet Direct, a company that he co-founded, which was one of the first ISPs in Arizona, based in the Phoenix area. And so in this episode, Michael not only relays the story of his particular company, but also the economics and the strategies of the independent ISP market, and also the realities of competing with the likes of AOL, and of course, the inevitability of the coming of broadband. Please enjoy this story that I believe has been largely undercovered up until now. Michael March, thanks for coming on the Internet History Podcast.
Thank you.
So since you're a recent listener, you sort of know the format. Let's start out with sort of geek bona fides. Tell me about your first computer, or the first few computers that you had growing up.
Sure. So first computer. So first of all, I was computer deprived for years. So when a lot of my friends, I had a friend, his father's into it, and so when I finally got, it seemed like I was late in the game, but I bought my first computer, TI-994A, back when Bill Cosby was the spokesman for it. If that long time ago, and then went into the Commodore 64, and but I would say the computer that really kind of brought me into a more the one that kind of broke it out for me was the Amiga 1000. Is as people know, is the first one that had true multitasking and a Unix-like operating system. And so those are the ones, but I guess the biggest thing that kind of pertains to later what I would be doing is in the mid 80s, someone in Phoenix here owned a HP 2000 and HP 3000 time sharing system in his office. So I don't know how it was, but some man in town here named Ed Sharp, he had a multi-user BBS ran on this big computer called System X, and that's where I think a lot of us here in Arizona got into multi-user being online. So he had a pretty big community here in Phoenix, and that kind of really, that was where you could. He had a full programming environment. And I was like 13 or so, but it was pretty big. Me and some friends were on it, and that's where I think the taste for being online and being able to create programs and content really started, I guess.
So let's underline that you're in Arizona, Phoenix.
Yep.
So
yes.
It's not like computers are rare, but then again, you're not like growing up in Silicon Valley, basically.
Exactly. That's a theme, like we're so close now via plane ride, but so far away. Yeah, it's there's a pretty vibrant computing community here, but we probably were a few months down the line from what was going on there, for sure.
So what about so this is the mid the late 80s. What about BBSs and things like that? You say you get your start with this timeshare system, but are there also local bulletin board systems in
Yeah.
Arizona?
So yeah, actually, I mean, there are a lot of good, thriving. I mean, I would kind of put, in fact, FidoNet, one of the first one of the first email relay um, uh, systems for BBSs was invented here. I believe my friend's brother wrote it or co-wrote it. So yeah, very big here. And in fact, I co-wrote a BBS that ran on the Commodore 64. Like who probably everyone did at one point. And when I say co-wrote, I probably did like minor stuff to it. My friend did most of that, but yeah, really into that. And yeah, so that was actually pretty big here. I would say you know, uh, I crap on my state a lot, but when it comes to the BBS scene, I think we were as good as anybody, for sure.
It's funny when you look at the BBS sort of like as an industry almost. It was almost more rural than not rural, because it was about like people in the sticks connecting with each other and things like that. And like, I don't have any hard numbers on this. I'm sure I could find them somewhere, but I feel like it was almost outside of the big cities was sort of the heartland for BBSs.
Yeah, yeah, and I think Arizona, and this is kind of a trope, but it's kind of true. Very kind of a pioneering type thing here. When very vibrant, political type things. Yeah. So I mean, it was definitely. I would say, I've have friends who like lived in the Midwest and on the East Coast, West Coast, and I would say, like, Arizona really stacks up. Yeah, and that kind of thing helped me, in my whole kind of what I plan to do.
So you're active on BBSs, trading files, talking to people. Are you also exposed to early online services like Prodigy, CompuServe?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I am. My thing was doing the trial of CompuServe. I never paid for it, ever. I would do the trial, and I probably did the trial. Like I probably, I probably every loophole and getting that extended whatever. So I never paid for CompuServe, and I never really found it super interesting either. Just the fact it was even back then compared to what I did with my when I had my own bulletin board or that other time sharing thing. It was a very curated type environment, and it was very uninteresting. But I did it all the time. So, anytime I could get a free trial, like when I bought something, whatever, I do it, ran out, and that was it. So that was the extent of my. Or sometimes, if you recall, some products, to get help on them, they had a form on CompuServe, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I do that, but it was purely. Yeah, I'm sorry.
That was a big deal for them. Is they made a lot of money that way, actually, just hosting customer service forums for various companies.
Yeah. So, and that was forced, but I really did not. Yeah, was not my thing, really. Yeah, for sure.
So you go to college late 80s, like 89, 90 or whatever. Is that too early to have internet in college, or what was that?
No, I mean, that was actually that was it. So when I got there, college, for many things about it, I had a horrible time for many reasons. But the thing that part of my early obsession was internet access. So the first thing is when you are in the engineering program there, and I don't think it mattered what type of engineering you would do some kind of a programming class. It would either be it was either, I believe, Pascal or Fortran, right? Depending on what what college you're in, right?
This is at the University of Arizona.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and so everyone got an account on the VAX. They had a VAX 1170, 80 or so. I forgot what the one was, but and everyone had an account on there, and that was within the engineering program, which was pretty big. You would there were a lot of people on there, and most people did their homework on it, and that was it. But for a good percentage of us, it was like where you kind of hung out. And I had a friend there who wrote a kind of a chat game thing called I forgot what it's called, but basically, people could start write their own software and games on there, and people would kind of hang out on there. And then there was one thing on the VAX that hooked up all the VAX systems called BitNet, and BitNet was kind of like the internet hooked up with leased lines between each college institution, but it was like a store and a forward thing. So the thing that kind of I was one night in my apartment with my friends, and I had my Commodore Amiga 1000. We had a digitizer there. We took a picture of us in the room, uploaded over the 2400 baud phone modem to the VAX, and then when it was in the VAX, we could send it to our friend who was going to Harvey Mudd College, and we saw that file go from node to node. It would tell you it's at this node, and it would go from each. I think it had to go like at least 5 or 6 hops, and then in his dorm room, every dorm room at Harvey Mudd had a hardwired 19.2 kilobit RS-232 port, and he could get it at his thing. So the whole thing between us doing it was like probably about 30 minutes time, but it was amazing being able, now, which takes, no time at all. It was amazing to be able to take that picture, upload it, put it through, watch it go through the thing, and all for quote free. You know what I'm saying? That was a kind of thing that kind of really informed it. And so and then there was a computer club that formed there in '90 called Hacks, and the purpose of that club was just to acquire and run computers, like multi-user ones, right? And so anytime any college was going to get rid of a server, they would get it. And that club kind of also, like for people who would be like, once you were in the engineering program and you were out, or that class, your VAX account would close up like that. Hacks was for people that wanted a persistent account on the internet, or on a server, and that kind of also kind of got the ball there, where like that club provided like a constant haven for people who are interested in having an account someplace, or just people who were interested in large computers. And that was about 1990, also around there.
So you definitely get the bug for the internet, but just having access, having connectivity was something that you found fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, whatever you could do, just having, just first and foremost, having an account on some sort of a Unix-like system, and be able to send email and do whatever you could do. That was just, that just kind of held my, that was everything, I guess.
Yeah.
It's huge for sure.
All right, so then let's go down your entrepreneurial story then. So does it start to occur to you that if you're so fascinated with having connectivity, that maybe other people would be, and maybe there would be a business there? Or walk me through how you start to think of this and launch it into a business.
Sure. So I think I think it was the summer of 90 or 91 or something like that. Or I kind of moved back to Phoenix for the summer, and part of it is I was going to write some software on spec for the county court system here. They had no way to track files in any kind of way that was not tracking them on paper, and so my friend and I wrote that system, and I took all my college money and put it into that, and then I ran out. And so it's kind of like, and so, and when I ran out, I'm here in Phoenix and I have no internet access.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, well, what's my options? It was going back to school, which didn't have any money, really. Two was, there were some places where there was in California, some places that you could do it, but it would be, the call would cost X amount. I mean, like calls back then across state line was expensive, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we're doing this, it was like, my main thing was, how am I going to get internet access, period. And I mean, that was what drove everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was, well, maybe, and since there's no options in Phoenix, really, I mean, there were no commercial options. Like, you couldn't call. I mean, if somebody would have created a service to do this, I would have not done this.
Right.
I mean, and that's, my thing was, I want a place to be able to read Usenet news, telling it around to places, and do email. And if someone would have done it and it would have been a good service, that I would have probably done something in the internet, but I would have not have created one. But so as soon as it was clear there was nothing there, and then I knew, and then as soon as I go, okay, I'm going to do this, and as soon as I made that commitment, I knew it was a matter of time, and it was, before it'd be flooded. I mean, you just kind of knew that, okay, it's not here. It's not really anywhere. Like, there are only a few, like, probably when we started, there was probably maybe 10 places around the country that were what we were going to do. And so the model wasn't really set, right? And so as soon as I go, okay, we're going to do this, then the race was on. I mean, and then we felt this, I mean, I can tell you this pressure to do as fast as possible to kind of, be the first.
Well, we should describe what you're trying to do is,
Sure.
The internet has existed for several decades now at this point, but it was always in academic circles. So to have access to email, to have access to IRC or FTP or things like that, you basically had to either, be at work or be at school to do it. So what you're describing is creating an industry that provides these services to consumers, like in the home or just on an everyday basis. And, so you're basically commercializing the internet, which at this point had basically just been an academic tool.
Absolutely, yeah. So, So what that meant at the time, and at the time that we wrote our business plan, like winter of '92, and final publishing was '93. It was basically setting up one server, right? That was one server that was a Unix-based server, and people could dial in with their phone modem, text mode, and then we would give them a menu that would give them, well, a full shell that they want to do whatever they wanted to, pretty much, and they would get to do IRC, which is the chat thing, MUDs, which is the online games, again, all text-based, FTP, and email, and then almost I'm sorry, and then read Usenet news, which
Mm-hmm.
was pretty much like, for people that know, that was the place where internet culture kind of started, like the kind of rules and rules and the not rules, I guess, and those were the bread and butter, basically. And then there were things like Waze. It was kind of a search thing, and Gopher, as soon as we started, we would put a Gopher client, I believe, almost immediately, and a server, and those were the kind of core things. But people would kind of call in and would do those things encompassed, people, being online. And those were the kind of the core services that we rolled out with.
So you describe writing a business plan, things like that. Did you go out and get funding, or actually let's back up for a second.
Sure.
How difficult is this to set up? Like you're saying, okay, we'll just put up one server and people can dial in. Like what's the actual monetary investment, like the structural investment you have to make? We think of today like huge server farms, and all you got to do is buy a rack somewhere. But what are the steps that you have to do to get started to do this?
Sure. So basically, I had worked for a company here in town that did. It's funny is they were kind of like the proto ads where you would dial it up and say, I want a phone number for Pizza Hut. And they go, oh, this number is brought to you by Pizza blah, blah, blah. So they would have it was free 411 service, but you would get an ad for it. Right.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So these people kind of had, and I had worked for them, and I knew the investors of that company. And so between my parents and a few of them, we got about, I think, $22,000. That was our seat, right? And so like that, and so what we had to do with that was get office space, buy at least one huge server. I mean, at the time huge. Now it's small. It was a 486 with 32 gigs of RAM and a port, blah blah blah, but very small now. But that back then was huge. That server was like about $3 or $4 grand. This is crazy. And then, but the kind of biggest thing that was the question. We had experience setting up that stuff. We were always doing that. But the thing that we didn't know about was the other things, like where to get access to the internet. So at the time, internet was definitely not commercial hardly at all, right? And to how you would hook up to the internet to resell was a big question mark. There was one commercial company really offering that, which was called UUNet Technologies, and they were like the main commercial kind of hub, but very expensive, and they had very strict reselling type things where like you could get a connection through them, but then if you wanted to resell any kind of commercial thing, then you had to sign some weird stuff. And anyways, so we found a company based in Palo Alto called PageSat, and their main business was they provided Usenet feeds. So that the whole forum type thing, Usenet feeds over a one-way satellite connection. So when we talked to them, because we wanted to have that, we didn't want the Usenet feed overpowering our lease line to the internet. So we did that, and they go, oh well, we sell internet too. So somehow they got a connection into, I think, the well or something like that, where they had a pretty good connection in Palo Alto, and they resold us a 56K line to Phoenix. Now, what was funny about that, and that was about, I think, $2,000 a month or something like that, some crazy amount. And I recall I was excited. I go, wow, I'm going to be getting 56K per second downloads. And so when they hooked up the line, and I did my first test ones off of Apple, FTP.apple.com, it was 6K per second. Like, and it was one of those things where in my mind I kind of was off by 10, but but in general, where you got your connection from the internet was it was a not clear cut at all. Now it's easy. Yeah, I mean, like there's a 10 million places to go, but back then, where you could hook up and what type of agreement, if you could even resell off it, was very murky, right? And then just getting our first domain name for our company, indirect.com, we couldn't even get it for 2 months because they were forming this organization called the Internet, and the Internet got a 5-year exclusive deal on on managing the registration of domain names. And so we had to wait 6 weeks, and then so we put in for it beginning of March. We got it like mid to end of April. So that whole infrastructure of getting your name, where to buy the stuff, it was not clear for a few years. And even after we moved off of PageSat, if you read through all things back then, it was just a mess about who could sell internet, what it meant. What I'm saying? Like it's just not
right.
It was very unclear.
There was and red tape and so okay. So we should say that the company that you start is called Internet Direct. Okay.
Yep.
And so the business model is simple. You're renting this or leasing this 56K line for what I think you said $2,000 a month or something like that, and then you resell. You allow people to dial in, and then you charge them to hook into that connection. And so who are you targeting as customers? Who's interested? What are you charging them? All that stuff.
Sure. So at first, from a consumer thing, there was a local computer free paper that was out every month called Computer Times or something like that here in Phoenix. I think it was a franchise that it was also available in other places, but I think it was tailored to each place. And we took out an ad there. And then we just took out ads, I think, in the paper, and we just said, if you want internet access, and we had a thing, get, Telnet, email, Usenet, blah, blah, blah. And we just targeted end users pretty much, right? And that attracted, though, everybody. So that was kind of our lead, but we had, all types of people. And in fact, when we launched, we had personal accounts were $19.95 a month for 20 hours. And business accounts, I think, were $30 or $35 per month. Now, you're asking yourself, what's a business account? Well, we just said if you use it for business, we could not enforce it. And I wasn't even really a big fan of that. But a lot of people, and I think we gave them more. So it wasn't that they were just charged more. We gave them, I don't know, I think more few more hours and some more space on the disk, so it wasn't a total scam, I guess. But those are the two things, and that's what we launched with. But from that point, people wanted to see about getting internet to their office, right? And so that was like the entree, and then people would call us to help us with anything, anything to do with the internet. That's where it kind of launched from.
So I have mentioned on the show before, but this is the story that we're trying to get into here. Sure. For a period of time when you're launching before the web goes mainstream, but for a period of time even after the web goes mainstream, the way that, first of all, it's a world where there's not internet everywhere. There's not cellular networks, cellular data networks. There's not Wi-Fi. You have to dial in, and you're not going through your cable company yet, because cable modems are not a thing yet. But so your options on the early part of the internet are either using a service like Prodigy or AOL once they give you internet connectivity, or there were, like you, hundreds, maybe thousands of independent ISPs that just did this, that just leased out these internet connections, in a computer in a room somewhere, and that's how the majority of people got on the internet in America for the first time.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah. So, that's exactly it. I mean, people would at first, our first customers would go onto our server and would run some programs on our server in a text-based fashion, and then would get on. But soon after that, the thing that made it, that was that next big leap, I would say, was the there was a program for Windows called Trumpet WinSock. And on a few of your shows, I heard a lot of people say there was no TCP/IP stack built into Windows 3, and that's true. And Trumpet WinSock, which you should really get this person on here because he's I believe he was the unsung hero here. It was a program written in Australia, I believe. It was shareware, right? I think $20, and it gave Windows 3 TCP/IP, so people could dial in. I think first with SLIP and then PPP, which is the two dial-up protocols, right? And they got full internet access on their PC into run whatever clients, like whatever when Mosaic came out, they would run that, or any Telnet thing, or Gopher client, or whatever they wanted to run. There were other programs that could use that. That was the thing that when that became available, that's what really made it. That was the first step to make it more mainstream than having people having to so if people were running IRC and MUD, all that stuff on our server, when they switched to Trumpet WinSock, they could run those clients on their computer, right? And they got that richer type experience, So that was the thing that early on, I would say late 93, early 94, Trumpet WinSock came out, and that was the thing that made Windows accessible. And then obviously when Windows 95 came out, that was that program wasn't required anymore. But for any Windows 3 user, which was for a long time, that's how people got on. There were some commercial ones that were probably better, like NetManage made one, Spry. The people from Spry made, they all had their own stack also.
Internet in a box, yeah.
Yep. And that probably a little higher quality, but Trumpet WinSock, if you talk to any ISP, that's or small one, that's what they packaged, and we became experts in configuring that. We wrote our own installer for it, and we tried to strike a deal with the guy, but he wanted end users to pay him. So we just kind of promoted it and would encourage people to pay their fees, I guess.
So let's go into just this era just briefly. So this is around this. You're mentioning Windows 95. So this is around the time when Mosaic and the Netscape and the web really hit the mainstream. Like at a ground level, all of a sudden, do you feel the turn? Like this is something that you thought, oh, maybe there's other people like me that will want to have internet access, and then sometime in 95, 96, or your neighbors are asking you about internet access. Like, did you feel that sort of tidal wave shift where all of a sudden the internet and the web were a thing that everybody wanted to be a part of?
Sure. So I'll kind of back up. So as I kind of stressed before, I was fully bought in, and everyone around me from day one. I mean, we felt that even pre-web, we felt that huge excitement, right? Now, however, so in I believe in late 93, around ASU, which is the other college here, they had a grand opening for their computing commons, which is their big building with all their labs and stuff, right? And they invited us to have a little booth there. And one of the students came by, and we were trying to get some stuff working. We had some software, and he goes, my roommate can help us with that. So we went into his dorm room after that whole thing, and he was compiling Mosaic for the Linux operating system, which was pretty hard back then, because it was super smart guy, and we saw it for the first time. So it was, I think, soon after it shipped, like their first versions, we saw it, and we're like, yeah. So to your point, we're like, it was that next bump. We're like, this is it. Because before that, we always heard about the World Wide Web, but it was always there. It was text based, not super interesting. Gopher seemed cooler to me than that, right?
A lot of people, a lot of people say that. Yeah.
Yeah. But when we saw Dan, he got it working in his dorm room. We're like, I mean, that really was the next thing. We're like, that it even with the first build and the first few sites like that, the potential was immediate and actually worked pretty well, right? And especially when you're ASU, everyone has, it's as fast as internet can be back then, right? Yeah. So then, so since that point, we were like everyone kind of obsessed with making it work, and not just on that platform, but the Mac and Windows, went like that. And every build and every new version that came out, we kind of tracked. Yeah, I mean, the kind of pressure that I heard the other people talk about in your other interviews definitely felt. I mean, just it to answer your question, it heightened whatever we felt any pressure to get this technology going, I guess.
Well, yeah, and you had mentioned you felt even from day one that you were in a race because you knew this was going to happen and you wanted to be a part of it. So what happens when it does mainstream and suddenly the AOLs of the world are offering internet access as well, and basically, I mean, AOL, for all the money that it spent on its walled garden content, was basically just a glorified ISP for most people to get on the internet. So independent ISPs, how did they deal with the explosion of consumer interest and then like competition from AOL?
Sure. I mean, so I was never a fan of the service by AOL. However, they did almost nothing. They were nothing but a boon to independent ISPs, in the fact that our main selling point was, this is the real internet. Because if you recall the early versions of internet with their browser, it was a horrible browser, and for a while there you couldn't even run other programs. Like, they didn't even offer like a WinSock interface to
Right.
run other clients. Like, you couldn't run your own browser. You'd run their browser, right? So we kind of hit people over the head again and again. If you want the real internet, come to us. And I mean, I can't tell you how many people we had that came from AOL to us. I don't believe we lost one client to AOL. We might have lost clients to other ISPs for various things, price or quality, or phone lines that didn't pick up. You know what I'm saying? But never. AOL, from the standpoint of any ISP, it only got people onto internet, and every ISP sold it as you're graduating to the quote real internet. So they were nothing but good for business. Other things were bad for business, but AOL, CompuServe, they all were. They didn't offer that many hours. And we always kind of sold it, rightly or wrongly, as the dumbed down internet.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you mentioned the business model was you were charging by hour, which you mentioned that, and I didn't pick up on it. But I've always heard that that was the big thing that independent ISPs did to differentiate themselves, is they quickly moved to unlimited. You pay one price per month and you can go unlimited hours, because that's how you differentiated from the hourly rates that AOL and CompuServe and other people would charge you. Did you guys do that also?
Very quickly. First of all, so I just want to kind of back up and just say, we leaned on a lot of software. Some of the first open source software is what our business was built on. We had to write everything though beyond. I mean, like for instance, so when you have an online service and you charge per hour, that means that you have to track it and bill it, right? And it makes it really more complicated. It makes tracking everything becomes, and so at some point, from a standpoint of what people wanted and the marketing and just the difficulty of collecting and billing on it, we went from 20 hours to 150 hours to flat rate, very quickly. I think we kept 150 hours for a long time, just because there's some people who just keep their phone on 24/7, so it gave them some pressure. And if we noticed a person on for that long, we could turn them off without violating any terms, right? But yeah, so what you heard is absolutely right from the billing standpoint, because now there's so much software out there. Like, if you wanted to set up a service and do reoccurring billing, there's a million things out there to do that, from PayPal to whatever.
Stripe,
Stripe, whatever you want to do. Back then there was no billing software that could do reoccurring billing under $1 million. Only phone companies and power utility, all these things, they needed that stuff. No small company needed billing, so we had to write our own billing package. And then we had to write, and then one other thing that was kind of hard to get was credit card processing. Now, again, there's Stripe and back then, no one billed like this on our size, right? I mean, if you were AOL or something, that you had a deal with the bank, I'm sure. So we had to get at first. It took us months to get our credit card processing. We had to put up $5,000 up that they held, and then I believe it was 7% per transaction or some crazy amount plus 50 cents. It was insane. And if we got 2 chargebacks, it'd be curtains. And so we had to, and then we had to get signed agreements from every customer who we did credit card processing for, like signed. The way that you did credit cards back then was insane, and that got loose over time. And we wrote on software to do the automatic charging at first, because there's no software to do it in an automated way. We had to hand type in every credit card every month. So then we wrote software for it. So we wrote on billing. I mean, just everything like that. That whole infrastructure wasn't there, and so we had to kind of create that out of whole cloth.
I don't think I've ever told this story on here before, but it wasn't that easy in '98 even when I started my first company, because I coded everything myself, like it was total bootstrap. But the thing that I needed money for first was to get that credit card merchant account for the same reasons why you had to put a certain amount down. And I was a college kid, so getting together $5,000 or $10,000 or whatever it was not exactly easy. But yeah, like just basically the basic thing, like billing your customers was not easy at the beginning.
No, I mean, like, I couldn't even rent a car at the time, much less. But that was not as bad as, trying to get credit card processing, and then like all of these, because like credit card, I mean, like, there just wasn't a model for it. And so that's why when kind of PayPal came out, as you know, it was it was what kind of broke everything apart. I mean, like anyone could take credit cards and have APIs like that. And back then that was not there. We actually, if you wanted to do high rate credit card transactions, you had to get what was called an X25 lease line into a bank. We found a company that made PC based credit card processing software, and you could have a modem in your PC and connect to it via a TCP socket and do a transaction. So we wrote a program that we had a rack of these servers, 20 of them, and it would balance credit card transactions across all 20. So we could do an aggregate, maybe about 10 transactions per 10 transactions per second, which you couldn't do it all. Like each one was like dial up, process down. So we could keep these up, and but so we had to write all that stuff. Now it's a dream, as you know.
So I'm super curious about, I hope this isn't pejorative, but like mom and pop independent ISPs like you. Like I said, there's hundreds of them across the country. They tend to be regional. I remember there was one in Ann Arbor when I lived there in the early 2000s. So if I am running one of these businesses like yours, how big of a business can I get? Am I like, can I get to like 50,000 people paying me $20 a month for internet access? Like how big of a business could this become?
Sure. So I think Phoenix was a great market in the fact that at the time we had the Phoenix market, although Phoenix is like a pond where there's nothing beyond the Phoenix area here, like Tempe, Phoenix, Mesa, there's nothing for like 100 to 200 miles, maybe more, right? So we're isolated, but it had one calling plan, so you could dial any. So there was like about I think 3 million people who could dial into my service for free
without paying long distance charges.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was new since like that changed before 91. Even down within Phoenix, they had 3 prefixes. You would have to pay from going from Phoenix to Scottsdale, something like that, but then right before we started a year, it was one flat calling thing, right? So for us, the potential was, what you said, up to maybe 40 or 50,000. One of my competition here, PrimeNet, I think got in Phoenix at least up to 25,000. We got up to, I think, 6,000. Mm-hmm. We made some choices of how we dealt with the phone company. I think PrimeNet did a good job of recognizing how horrible the telcos were and made some really good choices about how to deal with the efficiencies of dealing with the bell companies, right? So I think they got up to 25,000, but I think our peak was 6,000 to 7,000 dial people. And I think we probably could have went higher, but the problem at the time, before we thought that dial wasn't where it was at, we were getting one phone line at a time, or buying them in bundles, like individual phone lines, and having a modem on the end of that. And it's just a crazy way to go. That it was very hard to scale. There were companies that before they went on to where they would get T1s and have it be more of a way to have it go farther. We did it that way, and so. But to answer your question, probably in a market, if you stayed within your city, probably 20,000 would be around where you would be at if you were peak, right? Does that help?
Yeah. So, and I want to come back and we'll talk about your specific strategy when we wrap up here. But so if it's this fragmented system all around the country, really regional based, so it would seem logical to me that someone would want to come along and roll all of these small players up and sort of conglomerate it. And I'm guessing that began to happen towards the end of the 90s.
Yeah, for sure. What happened for me personally, in 95, early 95, late 94, my company was asked to provide internet connectivity to an IEEE conference happening here in Arizona. And so all like during breaks, all these engineers could kind of come in and could check the internet and check their email. Mm-hmm. And I during one of the things they showed during this thing was internet over cable, which I'd heard about but never really saw. And I saw it, and what they showed is they had a cable head end they brought in, and they had a Windows computer, and they had AOL client 2.5, it was a modified version going over the internet on cable, and it was incredibly fast. I mean, it was like, it was like boom on doing what, I mean, it was amazing. I'm like, we're screwed. Like, that's when I knew we got to get out. Like, even if we do well, there's a few more years left. There's no way we'll be able to compete against this.
So you're saying even by 95, right when things are really starting to take off, you can already see the writing on the wall, and that this is a sort of a limited engagement, a gig that you can do here.
Yeah, well, at least for access to the internet. Right. Like, it just seemed, I mean, it was such a dramatic I use the internet all day. Even in my office, it was like, which the internet they showed in this modified AOL client. It was like I got ill, but just it was just amazingly fast. And so at that point, you combine that with how we were getting screwed by the phone company in every which way. Like, they wouldn't do email with us, they wouldn't fax us. Everything was over the phone, and they would go months without. I mean, just and you talk to any other mom-pop ISP, and probably half of their complaints is being mistreated by Verizon or whoever they were called back then, or Pac Bell, or whoever their bell carrier was. They didn't give a crap about us at all. And so between seeing that and being, we're like, there's got to be there has to be a different way. And then at the same point, every mom and pop ISP was being approached by local companies on how to get on the internet. Like every one of them saw that and had that pressure. So at the time that we're starting to do this stuff, more and more companies are wanting to co-locate their servers in our office to have their own web server or email server or whatever, right? And so our office is starting to fill up with all these boxes of people's servers, and or they would want to have us buy the server and like lease it back to them, and it became this kind of mess. So that's where the thing that we did is we created the first virtual hosting, where you could have a name like indirect.com, email, FTP, pop server, all that stuff, and not have your own server, like have it be on a shared server. And it was basically that demo and our problems with the phone company. You go, this is something where we can control more the forces. We don't have to wait on we don't have to wait on US West to give us more phone lines, and we can have customers all over the world. So that's how we were happily forced into that, I guess.
Right. So even though for our purposes we've been focusing on providing an ISP for consumers, for your company specifically, you make the strategic choice to focus on getting businesses online and providing this virtual hosting, because then you can control your own destiny.
Yeah, and I think that when you talk to other companies that did the same thing, every one of them, what was nice is what is, by the way, a company per se. Like, you even had these little small people just doing consulting on their house, people who were attorneys, whatnot. Everyone, when they wanted to get onto the internet, they would call up these small ISPs to get their advice on how to do it, right? I mean, like, they had no, like, you couldn't call up like AOL and get like, how do I start to use email right now? So, like, we always had things where people could come down to our office and just get training, could just talk to us. I mean, it was a very Genius Bar type thing, where people, we had customers who would come down, hang in our office every day, and would just start to help us sometimes, like, and that kind of grew into, if those people had any kind of idea for a company, they would kind of seek our counsel on that, I guess.
Right. Just having the knowledge of how to do internet was so valuable in those days that's half your business, basically.
Exactly. It was very, I mean, it had a very community feel. So one thing I have to say is, so when we started a Usenet group called Alt Internet Director or something like that. And so our customers could go in and talk to each other. And as soon as we started, we almost immediately started, we had a set of phone modems in Tucson. So I don't know if you know anything about the state. Phoenix is the big city, and Tucson
down
is
at the
the
bottom.
smaller one.
Yeah.
Yep. But people from Tucson hate people from Phoenix,
I did not know
or
that.
like hate Phoenix.
Uh-huh.
And now it's funny is so I got my start. I went to the U of A is in Tucson. So a lot of the whole reason for this is my experience there. So I wanted to open up a pop there, and we don't forget we had a slow line going from Palo Alto to Phoenix, and then we had a shared 56K line between Phoenix and Tucson, and we had phone modems. So the quality was kind of spotty. So people in Tucson would go in on our board because all of our customers could see it, and they'd say, these super rich people from Phoenix, they think they can come in and push us Tucson people around, and then I had to go on and say, no, I love Tucson, I went to school in Tucson, my wife's going to be from But what's interesting though is getting that community feedback. This is one of the first types of which now you see on like everything, but where customers could talk to each other. Like if you have a problem with anything back then, aside from being an ISP, you would have to pick it or something, but here there was a forum that every customer was on, and they could talk to each other saying, hey, I couldn't get on, like the quality of the phone line was horrible. And they go, yeah, same here. And so people could kind of talk, and we'd have to kind of get involved. And, if customers were unhappy for our fault or not, we heard about it and everyone else did,
Yeah, it's the social media lynch mobs that are so common now.
Yes, yeah. And it was overall, I'm glad about it. I mean, like, it helped us improve, I would say. I mean, it was annoying to have to deal with it, but I think it was healthy, and I'm still a fan of it. But when you're right in the heart of that, it really does suck for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so your company does eventually get acquired by MindSpring, which later becomes Earthlink, and I think you sold off like the consumer dial-up business before that. But just briefly, tell me about getting acquired, and I think you end up working at Earthlink for several years.
Sure. Yeah. So we had sold our dial-ups into a company here in town in '96, and they got bought by, like, they eventually got bought by WinStar, and which was a big telco. But then we did our web hosting stuff, and in '98 we sold to MindSpring. Your question was what about that? I'm sorry again.
Well, just why did you sell? What were they? Actually, I am curious about MindSpring / Earthlink, because I feel like we haven't really talked about them at all. So just generally your impressions of them as a company, your time there, that sort of thing.
Great, yeah. So MindSpring, when we were talking to them, they had just gone public, I believe, and they were acquiring regional. That whole thing that you're saying, all those mom and pops, they were acquiring big and small ones. So they bought Pipeline, which I think you've talked about on this podcast. They bought Sprynet right after us. They were acquiring, and they were not using any of their infrastructure, really, mostly not, and just taking their specialty was taking those subscribers and converting them into their infrastructure, their billing. Like, they had billing down. They had, and I would say MindSpring. So you asked me about that company. Was an amazing company. I mean, so how I started my company when I was young, and I think how you go, like, what is some advice that you would give to people when when they do a company now? Well, people have a lot of avenues to read about how to do a company now, right? I would say, I was young, didn't even graduate from college. Technically, I was fine. Like, about the technology I had down, and my partners did, right? It was the legal framework of creating a company that screwed us. So very, very early on, and this is true with a lot of ISPs, but us in particular, when one of my main investors, when we used his attorney to create our corporation, and there was a thing in our bylaws where you had to have 100% shareholder approval to do anything big, right? Which is crazy.
Yeah.
They didn't notice it, and he dies of brain cancer 3 months later. This freak thing, and so we have this thing where we don't know what his intent was or anything, and so we did all this kind of great stuff in 4 years, but we were legally hobbled, so we couldn't get investment easily because no one wants to invest in a company that can't change. You know what I'm saying? So when MindSpring came along, we had gotten things together where they had a good deal where everyone who had invested was relatively happy with the deal, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that was kind of our way out. So as for MindSpring itself, the terms of deal were okay, but they were a great company. The guy, Charles Brewer, who started it, and the guy who was the president, Mike Haquiri, great people. Mike especially was just, I mean, any company that I've ever been, that I've ran since then or I have been a part of, iModel, he's been like the guy. Like back then, as you know, no one focused on being a profitable company. Like you were like quaint. MindSpring focused on that. They focused on they had core values and beliefs, and they just ran a great ship, and they organically grew their staff. So people would start out in the call center and would kind of grow up. So they didn't go out to all these big telcos and find people. They grew their staff. So it was a great company, and they grew through both organically. They're from the South, and they acquired a lot, and they did a great job of onboarding employees. All of my employees, they treated well, right? And it was a great experience. And they, I was so used to running my own ship, and I thought when I went there that I wouldn't like it because I wouldn't be in charge, but it was great. Then Earthlink, they merged. What happened was this is towards the .com bust, which you've covered. MindSpring had offers from like Microsoft, I think, for $5 billion. And they had an offer from Gateway for billions of dollars, right? And and no one was a fan of either company, but like, that's great. And Microsoft, sure, we hate them, but we'll learn to love with it. You know what I'm saying? But the CEO chose not to do it for some reason. And then .com bust happened, and all those big offers went away. Mm-hmm. And so then Earthlink and MindSpring, they were weirdly the same subscriber count. Started within a month of each other in 1994. I mean, they had all these on paper. They were the same, right? Mm-hmm. So they merged, but the way that they were ran was oil and water, right? And so they merged. No one was really. They changed the name to Earthlink, but the management was MindSpring. But there was resistance up and down, and it was a very sad end. So MindSpring for about 2 years was like an amazing experience that I wouldn't trade for. I mean, it was as exciting as running my own company, right? Mm-hmm. And then when they merged, it was a very sad. I mean, I met a lot of great people from Earthlink when they merged, but the overall merger was a disaster. And they never really regained. Like, they had so many opportunities to go all these. They had, between the two companies, millions of dollars per month in reoccurring income that they could build. They could have built all these nice web services, like a portal, blah, blah, and they did all that stuff, but it was always not the best quality, right? And they just blew the opportunity. They had all this income to build all these great things, and it did never come to fruition. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah.
But MindSpring Institution was just an amazing place for sure.
Well, to wrap it up here a little bit, if you read these stories of any ISP, of AOL, of the independence of Earthlink, and you're looking back on it 20 years later, you're thinking to yourself, well, of course, that was all going to go away. The fattest pipes into anyone's home are owned by either a phone company or a cable company. Surely everyone knew this was a limited time thing, eventually to be supplanted by broadband. But is that true? Like, did you all feel that way at the time that, okay, eventually it's going to be broadband and this sort of dial-up thing will go away? Or do you feel like that there could have been an alternative universe where there are different sorts of ISPs and independent ISPs and people other than your cable or your phone company giving you internet?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think at some point everyone kind of believed that and were jockeying themselves to be bought. And then for a while, and I was out of it by then, but a lot of friends were still in the ISP biz. You could be an ISP, a mom and pop, and resell resell DSL lines. So I don't think a lot of people have that now, but there was a mandate from the FCC where telcos had to provide you raw ISDN, right? And so you could provide broadband as a mom and pop ISP. And at some point, the ISPs didn't cooperate very well, and they closed up that requirement during the Bush administration, I believe. But for a while there, it looked like after I got out, but my friends were in there still, that there was a possibility, right? But that was very short-lived too. But I think, and my early view of that technical demonstration was still not like people didn't feel that way probably for another 2 years, I would say. Like I would say at least until maybe 99 in 2000, even when cable was first. I mean, cable had a slow. I mean, like cable internet wasn't really prevalent, I would say, really till 2000 anyways, from up until 2000, I think things looked pretty good for ISPs, right? I mean, like MindSpring, for instance, they were growing, when MindSpring couldn't get their broadband thing off the ground, really, that's when things kind of like fall apart. But I would say, the smart ISPs were in the game until 2000, I would say.
Well, to wrap up, we've briefly talked before, and I'm looking at your LinkedIn page, so I can tell that you've stayed in tech generally, but as I'm thinking back on the story you've told here and how you sort of accidentally start this business out of college or whatever, and it's almost like you're creating a business on the internet before anyone even knows that the internet can be something that you can build a business around. I think I've asked other people this, but I'm curious, do you think that there's maybe a value to not knowing what's not possible when you're starting a business? Like, if you know the things that you shouldn't be able to do, maybe you don't even do it. Is there some value to entrepreneurs sort of going into things blindly and stupidly, because that's almost how you have to do it to succeed, maybe?
I mean, absolutely. So, I've heard a lot of people here on your podcast talk about, I'm the gray beard guy now, blah, blah, blah. And for sure, I mean, like what I did not know, I mean, I did not know what I did. I mean, I totally underestimated the business side of it, right? But I think that was good. Like, maybe if I had known a lot of stuff, like I probably some things would have helped. Overall, that belief that it could be done made it done. I mean, like, what's funny is my kind of tenure of running my own ISP was like 4 years, and we got so much done. I mean, even crippled by all these things, all the software that we wrote and growing a business and like doing all this stuff. I mean, I look at my past 4 years now, and I feel like I'm a slacker now. You know what I'm saying? I mean, yeah. It's just, I mean, like just the incredible productivity and wrangling. I started when I was 22 years old to 26. People worked for me who were 3 times my age, and wrangling these people to create awesome stuff and like both write software and run a service and all these things in between, and then sell it, now I just know too much that I probably wouldn't take those chances. I mean, and I have, kids, or I I have a son that's about that age now, who he would be, and I hope he takes those chances when he's young to do something like that. And now there's so much, as infrastructure to do it. It's a lot less risk. So it's really just your time and effort. So yeah. So to answer your question, um, definitely not knowing stuff. It caused me some pain, but I wouldn't have done it in the first place, and that would have been the real bad thing, I'd say.
So the lesson is just do it. Just take the take the gamble.
Yeah, for sure.
So Michael March, thank you so much for telling that story. And I've been, as I said to you, I've been trying to get someone to tell me the story of independent ISPs and really the history of how Americans got on the internet in the first place. So thanks for sharing all that for us.
Thank you. Yeah.
Brian here, cutting in to add an additional item. Michael also had a fascinating story to share about the birth of online spam that he was at least tangentially connected to. But, and this is entirely my fault, somehow we forgot to get into that little story in our conversation. So Michael was kind enough to record the story and send it over to me, which I will post here. The brief story about the beginnings of online spam that Internet Direct was unwittingly connected to.
Okay, this is a quick summary of the green card lottery incident. So here we go. So the summary of the event is this. On April 12th of 1994, Lawrence Cantor and Martha Siegel, they executed a script that they had written by some local contractor here in Phoenix. And that script, basically, it took one message, and the summary of that message is, hey, people of the world, there's a pending U.S. green card lottery. If you want in, contact us. So that's what the gist of it was. And they posted that same identical message to 6,000 plus Usenet groups. And so first I'm going to say is, so that's what happened on our service. They did it through us, but this was not their first incident of doing this. They manually, I think, spammed hundreds or maybe up to 1,000 groups from a ISP based in California called Netcom, and they did it from there, and they got into some small trouble there. And from what I understand, they were not fond of paying long distance fees to call up them. So I guess when they want to do their big splash, they pick someone here in Arizona, yay local, and they they chose us, I guess, to do that. And so a week before that incident, they came in. They asked to speak to us, and so I just want to say that at the time, being the first dial-up ISP in Arizona, we had a lot of people coming into our doors to tell us and pitch their current business or their future business and how they can get it in working on the internet. So we were having these meetings all the time, people coming in, pitching their, either things ranging from their, if they were attorneys, we actually had a lot of those, to people with their new multi-level marketing scheme, whatever it was. We had a lot of those meetings going on. So this was not an out of the ordinary type of event. And with anyone that we met with, we always tried to educate them on the general guiding principles of the internet and make best choices when they, at the time, doing commerce on the internet was new. So we try to make people mindful of the culture and the technical ways to do things on the internet. Anyway, so they met with my business manager at the time, Bill Fisher, and Bill went with them through our terms of service. And as they started to pitch to him what they wanted to do, or as it became clear, Bill brought me in, and they kind of did to me a quick pitch. And I, again, at the time I was teaching a class about, I think, twice a month or maybe even more often than that, about the internet and how to use it. And I focused on the Usenet, and I kind of explained the technical details about how when you post a message in a group, that message gets copied to every other server, and that can cost the other servers, it costs them storage and transmission costs and all these things. And I try to make them mindful that, not only is there a culture where we're supposed to stay on topic in each of the 6,000 Usenet groups, but there was a cost component that maybe they weren't paying, but everyone else was paying. And they really did not care. They just want to know if our servers could handle doing this script, and they want to know if we would stop them or not. And I told them, and both Bill and I told them, we don't pre-censor our customers, and if they're short of doing anything illegal, we don't stop anything, but we highly encourage them not to do it. And we had other customers had kind of pitched us the same thing before, and when we gave them these warnings, they didn't do it. They had left, and a few days later, they actually executed it, and all hell broke loose. We got calls, we got thousands of calls. Our email servers crashed, and we shut them down. We actually saw where this event kind of violated their terms of service, and we shut them all down. So, and they tried to get, they had their attorneys contact us to get all their emails, and we denied that, and that was it. And so that was part of, we were unfortunately wrapped up with their 15 minutes of infamy. It's interesting, by the way, if you read their book that they wrote shortly afterwards called How to Make a Fortune on the Super Information Highway, their recap of this event is actually pretty accurate. The things I told you now are pretty much what they say, but their interpretation of everything is very askew. They really did not care about internet culture. They didn't care about costs that other people would incur. They only were worried about what costs they would incur. It's a very, very selfish point of view. And just a quick postscript to that. That later that year, they started a company called CyberCell to help people sell things on the internet, and we registered the domain name cybercell.com, and they tried to sue us to get it, and we refused, and so they never got that name, and that was our little thumb in their eye kind of thing. So that's it, and I hope that explains it, and talk to you guys later.
If this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, please subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice. There's plenty more great internet history where that came from. And if you're a longtime listener, then you know what to do to help us out. Rate and review us on iTunes. Because iTunes gives credit to reviews and ratings, and the more great reviews we get, the more people will discover us. As always, there's more info on our website, www.internethistorypodcast.com. The show's Twitter handle is @NetHistoryPod, and my personal Twitter is @BrianMCC. Thanks for listening.